Day zero of MMT Del Mar, what I like to call the storm before the storm. Now, this is part one of a 5-part series that I'm going to do to share some of the takeaways and some of the behind the scenes of our most recent MMT gathering. MMT is an invite only community for entrepreneurs and arguably one of the most exclusive communities out there for entrepreneurs. And our most recent gathering in Del Mar, California, had an approval rating of 9.85 out of 10. So I'm going to share the why behind some of that high rating, one could say, and also areas of improvement and refinement that we'll be leaning into in the future. So day zero of the event. Now, MMT historically, when we first started out, was a 2-day live experience. And based on the feedback of our members in 2016, we ended up adding a third day to create a little more space for people to connect and just really ease into the experience because up until that point, it was pretty intense as far as 2 days. However, over the years, we have created a little bit of additional space, one could say, the day before the event to support our members, both our returning alumni and our new additions to the community. So at a high level, you could say that MMT is now a 3.5-day live experience. So what we refer to as day zero internally is effectively the day before the official event starts. And there's two key features of that day. The first one is a new member welcome. This is something that we integrated after MMT Costa Rica in 2023. And the reason for it is we would often get feedback that although MMT is a very inclusive community, it's a different type of event. And there's almost this element of having an understanding of how to pace oneself and also it's very different. It's hard to put into words, and I smile because I'm reviewing some of the feedback from this experience from new members, and they're like, I could have never guessed this is what I was going to get in the best way possible. Like, you can't put it into words. So for us, we're always looking for ways to ease our members into the community because, again, there was just this sentiment that it took the first event to kind of get your footing. So we integrated this new member welcome, which ultimately does a couple things. The idea behind it is to share with our new members the evolution of MMT so they can get an understanding of all the inner workings, which is important, and also how they can make the most out of the live experience because again, the way we structure things is rather different. And all of that in hopes that when we start the event officially on the morning of day one, I can get everyone to fly in formation. It doesn't matter if they're new to the community or if this is their 9th, 10th, or 11th gathering with us. So that's what we do on the afternoon of the day before the event. And then after that, a couple hours later, we host a mastermind dinner. And this is something that we've had in MMT for many, many years, where the spirit behind that is we have members that fly in from all over the world, as far as Thailand and Australia and that kind of stuff. And we want to create a space where they feel like they can just ease into the experience and land a little bit. So there's a lot of thought that goes into those dinners, but there's really two features that makes them rather unique. One is the assigned seating. Now, we do assigned seating at a couple points during an MMT live experience, and it's one of those things that members love most. Even as I look at the most recent feedback form for Del Mar, over our time together, we have 7 seatings, one could say, if you take out breakfasts and lunches. And it's almost unanimous that the community wants more assigned seating because they know the level of thought and care that goes into the assigned seating, specifically that first dinner. So there's a lot of considerations when it comes to that first dinner. One of the considerations may be, how can I make someone feel comfortable and safe as they kind of just ease into MMT? So if they were nominated by someone or they already know a couple members in the community, I may seat them all together at a dinner. Oftentimes I'll consider, is there an opportunity to give them an early win? If I know they are struggling with culture in their business, I may sit them next to somebody who's a rock star in culture. Or if they have a specific interest, I may sit them at a table with other folks with that same interest. So that's another lens that I look at. Some of the placements are just done energetically. Every single placement I do, I often sit and consider, if I'm sitting at this table, what are some of the conversations that we're going to have or could potentially have? What is some of the what's some of the energy that is available to us. And then another thing I may often do is see if I can make it a wow experience for someone. So there's times in the past where in an intake form somebody would say, "Oh, this particular book was a game changer for me," and ironically, the author of that book may be an MMTer. So I will sit them together at that first dinner. So that's key feature number one of those mastermind dinners is. Um, the assigned seating and the thought and care that goes into that. And then the second component is the curated conversation. So when members sit at their dinner table, there will be an 8 by 11 card on the table, and there will be two questions or two components to that conversation starter. The first is an order question. So, or actually, order or host. So the idea is we're trying to assign a host for the table, and their role is rather important because they set the tone for the conversation. And there's a saying that relationships move at the speed of trust and vulnerability. If you want people to be vulnerable, then oftentimes you need to lead with vulnerability. So the host has a very important role because without them, conversation may be kind of surface level. So they have an opportunity to set the tone. And the second component to their role is they ensure that everybody has an opportunity to share, which is really, really important. So you need to make somebody the captain of that table, so to speak. And then there's an icebreaker question or a conversation starter. Now, I have a depository of over 1,000 of these at this point. But for that first dinner, I usually try to anchor in a future focused question, one that gives an opportunity for people to really just drop into what would be most helpful for them or what's most useful, where are they focusing their energy, gives them an opportunity to kind of bring voice to it in a small group setting and also plant that seed. There may be somebody at that table that has experience or has a solution or whatever the case may be. And that is often, again, goes into the consideration process when it comes to placement. But even just bringing voice to it and planting that seed at a dinner table of 6 people, you have 5 other people that may be on the lookout or hopefully will be on the lookout for the rest of the event as far as how they could potentially make a connection with another member or what have you that can support you on your journey. So the future focus question for us that we leaned into for MMT Del Mar is one of my favorite. It's one of our staples. It's if we were to meet a year from today with a bottle of champagne, what are we celebrating? So that is the, I guess, the sequence of day zero. When I look back at what went well and what could use refinement, what went well for that new member welcome was I worked very closely with a brilliant storytelling coach. If I were to rate my talk at the new member welcome, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. A 9 out of 10 is possible, but it requires me to just get better at my delivery. So that felt really strong. The room for improvement there for that new member welcome was it was my voice for 40 minutes. We got out early, which is always a bonus, but it was my voice that carried the entire session. And as a rule of thumb, I try to break things up every 10 to 15 minutes by either bringing other people's voices and getting them to share or integrating some kind of peer-to-peer component. So that is an opportunity for us to kind of restructure that in the future. But overall, that session just felt very tight, and historically, it hasn't felt as strong as it did. When it came to the mastermind dinner, what went well was the energy. And initially, we were supposed to do the dinner outside, and my business partner, wife Candace, decided to bring the dinner inside because of it was rather cold. So it was ultimately the right decision. And bringing everybody into the room, there was a lot of energy, a lot of intimacy. One of the drawbacks, and it's a balance, and this is a room for possible refinement in the future, it was that it was rather noisy in the room because there was so much energy. And what happens in a group setting is one person talks loud, and then another person talks loud so that they can hear, then another person talks loud, and the next thing you know, it's really, really loud. So that is it's a fine balance, and sometimes you don't know what that balance is until like you're in the moment. But that's something for me to consider in the future is the space between tables and that kind of stuff, because we definitely want to create an environment where if the core focus is for people to have a conversation, that they have the ability to do that and be able to focus on conversation. And for us, when we do these dinners, we do them in tables of six, which is really, really important because at a table of six, you can have one unifying conversation as opposed to if you have a table of seven, eight, or more. Traditional roundtables are 8 to 10 people. Naturally, no matter how hard you try, conversations will start to splinter, and that makes it hard to focus and that kind of stuff. The one thing that made day zero of MMT rather unique was when you're in the events business and you're hosting a group, there's infinite things going on behind the scenes that you are, you know, just rolling with the punches. Whether that's venues have requests or last minute things or menu things or whatever the case may be. My wife Candace does a lot of the behind the scenes when it comes to MMT and shields me from a lot of that. However, I received a text on the morning of the 17th from one of our members indicating that their flight had been delayed from, I think, like a 9 a.m. flight time to 1 p.m. Not the end of the world, not ideal, because it puts us on edge of like, are we going to have to shift assigned seating and that kind of stuff? But our largest, I guess, market of members is based in Toronto, and we had about 15 members, I believe, slated to fly out of Toronto. So the new flight time ended up being delayed once and then twice. And then I saw a note in our group chat from one of our members that everybody was boarded the plane and they were getting ready to take off. And at that time, I was looking at the flight tracker and I was pressing refresh and refresh every few minutes to make sure that the plane, left the airport. And I believe it was like a 1:55 departure. I checked at like 2 and then 2:03, 2:05. So I'm like, okay, good. There's no updated time, so everybody should be good. At 2:15, I got a note that there was a plane crash, and a message that followed was, "We're not going to get there anytime soon." And I remember my heart just dropping, and also incredible confusion overwhelmed me because I didn't know what plane, what kind of crash. I mean, plane crashes don't happen all that often. So I was hoping, obviously, those from our community and many, many very, very close friends weren't affected by this. And I was going on Google and I was trying to hit refresh to figure out what's going on when it comes to this plane crash, and then ultimately discovered that a Delta flight from Minnesota, which is oddly enough a flight path that many of my friends have taken over the years, because I have lots of friends in Minnesota that come to Toronto, but ultimately a plane from Delta landed on the tarmac in Toronto and flipped, and our group of MMTers were on a separate plane in Air Canada flight and on tarmac getting ready to leave, and ultimately had to turn around and get back to the terminal to kind of figure out a new flight path, one could say. So their plane got delayed multiple times, and that forced us behind the scenes to make a lot of shifts when it came to the seating arrangements and that kind of stuff, which is challenging. So we have name tags that are already printed with their table numbers on them and that kind of stuff. And truth be told, I was heartbroken. Uh, I'm usually pretty good at like rolling with the punches in the moment and that kind of stuff, but it's hard to explain how it felt. It felt like you put all this effort and energy to like do this great party, and a handful of people that you're really, really excited to see can't come for some last minute, situation. And also, I mean, I was just so attached to having them there because in advance of an MMT, I often sit and just consider I just go through the motions of the event and like if I'm sitting at this table, like who's to my left and right, and like what is the flow of people's experience and that kind of stuff. And a handful of those folks that were stuck in Toronto were key people in that like experience that I'd gone through in my head hundreds of times. Ultimately, there was two groups. One could say that split off. Actually, before I'll say it, I'll share this. In typical MMT entrepreneur fashion, they made lemonade out of lemons. And one of our members, longtime member and longtime friend of mine, Shelby, ended up securing, through the help of other people there, a conference room at the Air Canada Lounge and did a unofficial roundtable, which I've had a lot of people just reflect back to me how just beautiful it was and how meaningful it was because they created this little pod of just relationships, one could say, even before they got to MMT. But ultimately, some chose to stay back. They were in the airport for almost 20 hours, many of them. Some chose to try to rebook their flights through Air Canada, and others, a small contingent of about 5 members, decided to like drive at 2 in the morning or something ridiculous to Buffalo. This is again after being in an airport for 20 hours. Take a flight out of Buffalo at like 5 or 6 a.m., fly to Denver as a connection flight, and then Denver to San Diego. They ended up showing up in like the early afternoon of the first day of the event. And it was, I mean, beautiful to see them. And yeah, it was great to see them, but I was still very much heartbroken around the MMTers that weren't able to join us. So that was day 0 of MMT Del Mar. In the next post that I'll be making, I'll share about day 1, the official day 1 of the event, how we structure the container setting session, which is arguably one of the most important sessions we do as a community together to get everybody, again, to fly in formation. We did a exercise called Step into the Circle, which was really fun. And then I'll also share with you 2 special guests who joined us. One who had written, I believe, 23 books, and arguably one of the most impactful speakers and special guests we've ever had for MMT, and then another individual who has been on Joe Rogan's podcast 10 times over the last handful of years. So we'll give you insight on those special guests, our container setting session, and some of the takeaways from MMT Day 1.